to my knowledge, Ms. Kamish Ahmed are alternate members to this meeting. All members of Parliament are obviously welcome to attend Budget Committee meetings, but I have not received any apologies from any of the permanent members on this committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good afternoon to the Budget Committee. We look forward to engaging with members of the committee on the documents tabled before you. We're here with the senior management team, and I'll ask the head official of Treasury just to help with the introductions.
Thank you, Minister, Chairperson, honourable committee members. Yes, we have a full team from the Provincial Treasury here today. Myself, David Savage, head of the department.
Apologies, HOD. I just see a hand up there, and I'm not just going to check if it's a point of order. Member Kayla Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, just to raise, I've been informed that those listening on YouTube are struggling to hear. If ICT could please attend to that.
Ms. Kamish Ahmed, if you can just please check. You can just take a second or two quickly. Member Murray, if you can maybe just check for me online on YouTube, maybe if we are audible.
Thank you, Chair. I've just been messaged now to say that it's working again. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. HOD, apologies for the interruption. We all want to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Chairperson, I was just going to introduce the team here from Provincial Treasury. I know some others are following online as well. So this is not by any means the full team that has been involved in the preparation of the budget, but just enough coverage, I think, for questions that the members of the committee may have for this meeting. So I'm joined, if I just go down the row, by Dr. Roy Haverman, who you know is the Deputy Director General for Fiscal and Economic Services, Ms. Shirley Robinson, who's the Chief Director for Public Policy Services, Ms. Jalinda Gantana, who's the Deputy Director General for Governance and Asset Management in the Treasury, Ms. Annalise Pick, who's our Chief Director for Provincial Government Public Finance, and then right over on the side there, Mr. Paul Pienaar, who is he is our Director for Business Information and Data Management, but a lot more. That I can assure you. Mr. Stephen Kenyon, who's our Chief Director for Local Government Public Finance. Ms. Michelle Nicholas, who is our Director for Provincial Government Public Finance. Ms. Sharon van Breda, who's our Acting Director for Infrastructure. Mr. Malcolm Boyson, who is our Director for Fiscal Policy, Ms. Taryn van der Reede, who is the Director of our Provincial Government Budget Office, and also so much more, and Jono Hendricks, who's our Deputy Director in the Provincial Government Budget Office, and again, so much more as well. So that's the team from our side. Chairperson, I know that we have limited time to go through quite an extensive amount of information. In accordance with the agenda, I understand you wanted to deal with the adjustments, estimates, and our Q3 report first, which may make sense because they both deal with the 22-23 financial year before going on to the main budget. Am I correct in that, or would you like to do it in reverse order?
That is correct. And because of that, I also just want to ask that the Department of Premier just introduce themselves online because they deal with the performance side of the budget. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Zinat Ismail, the Department of the Premier and Head of the Provincial Data Office. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Jacques Barnett from the Department of the Premier and also working with non-financial performance data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister and HOD.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. So we will start with the 22 additional adjustments estimates. The Minister did mention this in her speech. There are two adjustments. The one is associated with emergency expenditures associated with load shedding, and the other is associated with education infrastructure. And then we'll go straight into the discussion on the Q3 financial performance. But for that, for both of those, I'll hand over to Ms. Pick.
Thank you, Good afternoon to all the members. Good afternoon, Chair. So we're kicking off with the additional adjustments estimate. So this is happening in real time. So what I mean is in terms of the bill, in terms of that was just tabled in the House. And so we start kicking off in terms of from where we left off in November 2022, where we had a total additional budget to the value of 77.8 million. To that 77.8 million, we're now adding 204 million rand. And that 204 million consisting of two amounts. One for the Department of Education. That value is 115 million rand, and that is in terms of the Division of Revenue Act, where in terms of at the national level, the conditional grants, the national departments have a look at in terms of spending performance of the actual grants, and in terms of the Division of Revenue Act, then they are then allowed to reallocate, so suspend allocations from certain provinces and then reallocate to others. In this case, as Minister indicated in his speech, the suspension was for the province of the Eastern Cape and Mpumalanga for the education infrastructure grant. And then the reallocation of that funding was then to Gauteng and then also to us as the Western Cape. I mean, we are a province that has been known in terms of being able to spend in terms of at the end of the financial year. And so this funding year for the 115 that you actually see here is in terms of looking at in terms of increase in terms of mobile classrooms that we'll be able to respond for infrastructure. Then looking at the second allocation, that is in terms of 88.8 million rand, and that's for the department and vote of 14 local government. And that is in terms of section 25 of the PFMA. That we're allocating from the unforeseen and unavoidable reserve, and that, as indicated, is in terms of for the emergency immediate response for the prolonged load shedding and the impact that has on municipalities. So we've also indicated there's a gazette in terms of that actually gives you the breakdown of the 88 million rand that will be transferred to municipalities regarding that. Would you like me to go straight into quarter three?
Yes, please. I just want to confirm this quarter ended December. Okay. So while we do get the respective information, it might be a little bit old by now. Thanks.
That's correct, Chair. And where I can, I will try and just give some brief updates that just provides updated context from that perspective. So before we kick off on the third quarter, I just want to make very clear when I said in terms of the additional adjustments budget, and I said that's real time because it's happening right now. And our quarter three, as the chairperson has indicated, is our quarterly reporting by the various votes on their performance, but that is in terms of ending as of December 2022. Therefore, any of the numbers that you see in the presentation will not include the additional adjustments budget numbers. So I just want to make that clear for everyone. So in terms of the context on the integrated performance data, I will kick off, and then the Department of the Premier, our partners, will then give you a bit more information. We've also then given you in terms of the presentation here is in terms of we're looking at in terms of indicating to you Part A, which is the overview of our socioeconomic and performance trends in the Western Cape up until quarter three. We'll look at the financial information, and then attached to the presentation, we've then also included in terms of some delivery trends in terms of actual targets and what that actually means in terms of on the ground in terms of service delivery. Now that is at the end of the presentation, right? So, and that's your Part C. That we won't go into any of the detail, but it is there for members to have a look at and to assist the members in their oversight when they at their various standing committee meetings going forward. So, and I then asked the Department of the Premier if they will kick off with Part A, the overview of the socioeconomic and performance trends. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I'm not able to see the presentation, but I will talk to it. So the context of the integrated performance data, The quarter release for quarter 3, as you would know by now, it's an integration of non-financial and financial performance data. This is the third quarter that we have continued to embark on the transform journey, as we have presented to the committee before we embarked on this transform journey. Just a kind of reminder that it is to increase the depth and the breadth and on the use of performance data, ultimately to improve our service delivery. So this presentation for today continues to provide an integrated view of our socio-economic trends of the Western Cape, the performance delivery trends of the Western Cape, and this performance delivery trends is both financial and non-financial. The trends as they relate to contribution of job safety and well-being, and that the committee, chair, it is available right at the end of the presentation. So ultimately, we will do part A, just an overview. We will move into the financial trends, which my colleague Annalise Pick will be doing, and then there are also delivery trends, which is the next year. When we move into the fourth quarter, we're aiming to actually consolidate this integrated performance reporting. Thank you. Towards the annual report. So if one look at the overview, the socioeconomic picture through the indicators as we measure it through the provincial strategic implementation plan, and as we have communicated before, there's about 40 outcome indicators. 22 refers to jobs, 6 refers to safety and well-being. There's about 12. Key to note in terms of the jobs, our gross domestic rate for Western Cape was about 2% during the quarter 3 of 2022. Number of people unemployed decreased by 3%, and official unemployment rate stood at 24%. But I just would like to pause here because we are now in the fourth quarter already. And the official unemployment rate for quarter 4 is about now 22.5%. The number of employed increased by 85,000 in quarter 3. And in quarter 4, about 167,000. If one look at the official unemployment rate, it's, as I said, it stood by 24%. But if one look at expanded unemployment rate, quarter 3, 29.5%, and now as we are in quarter 4, slight nice decline to 26.8%. I just want to go into the number of unemployed decrease, as I said, 3%, and that 3% is about 101,000 people. Noting that for this quarter as we stand, there's a further reduction of about 4.7%. A total of about 11.4% reduction, but 4.7%, but 4.7% respectively. But having said that, what does the picture look for safety? There's increase in violent crime with homicides in Western Cape, 12.4%. 13 priority areas, focusing on 13 priorities areas in the Cape Metro, recorded about 7.2% increase. This accounted for about 49% of all homicides, and then 11% increase in the number of sexual assault. For well-being, very much in terms of mental well-being in education, there's about 692 cases that have been referred to statutory social work services in the court in the third quarter, down from 774. And the needs aged 15 to 34 has decreased in the third quarter. And 11.4% of our children born in government facilities weighed under 2,500 grams. So the socioeconomic picture, some nice positive trends, but we cannot ignore the negative trends also, especially in the safety space, and to some extent also in the jobs and the well-being. When one look at Western Cape government per se, and institutional performance, the slide shows the overview of provincial departments' performance for quarter 3, 76%, which is 408 out of 536 targets for the said quarter. If one look at the column below, then one see, if one compare that to previous quarters, then quarter 1, there was 80%, and quarter 2, 83%. So a slight decline in the overall performance for the relevant quarter. When one look at the indicators that only speak to the APP performance, one see that we have achieved 337 of 447 targets, which is about 75%. And 1 out of 13 departments achieve all their targets, while they are obviously, as usual, always partially achieved targets and not achieved targets. But interesting to note, when one look at our departmental clusters, and one group our departments into clusters, one can see that the governance cluster stood out on 88%, social cluster 67%, and economic cluster 76%. And just a word of caution that that three figures, 88, 67, and 76, does not add up, or the average is not 75%, with each of those clusters have actually, they don't speak to the same common denominator. They all have a different amount of targets. When one look at our public entities, one can see that we have achieved 71 of 89 targets, which is 80%. And 4 out of those 11 entities have achieved all their targets. The public entities in terms of clusters, 86% achieved governance, social cluster 78, and economic cluster 79. Now the depth of this one, when one want to go deeper, then the annexure actually tells a very nice story of the service delivery performance and the service delivery environment. The following 2 slides actually shows our average performance compared to quarter 1, quarter 3 for only the provincial departments, while the second slide has it for the public entities. And to give the committee a nice overview, or just a brief synopsis, one can look at the targets achieved in quarter 1, the targets achieved in quarter 2, the grey bar, the green bar, and then in quarter 3, the blue bar, and one gets a sense of the performance per department across the 3 quarters. And what one observes, in some instances, there's consistency, and it's across the 3 quarters, and in some cases, there are variations. And the reason for that, it is also well documented in the report, in the integrated performance report, the reasons why some departments achieve a certain target or not, overachieve or underachieve. The final slide, when one look at the average performance for quarter 1 to 3 for the public entities, one can see a similar trend. However, a little more consistency across the public entities in terms of how they're performing across the 3 departments. Noting that one cannot just do a clear-cut comparison, because the number of performance indicators in comparison to a department differs to a great extent. I thank you and I hand over to Annelies.
Thank you, Zenith. So part B, in terms of just a quick snapshot of the financial performance trends, and kicking off with expenditure per department on the next slide, indicates on the next slide, in terms of indicates to you in terms of the average spend as at the end of December for the province is about 73% of budget. And then when you look at those numbers, it appears that there's certain of the votes that could be looking at an underspending, and so our emphasis on appears. But if you look at the trends, so if you look at in terms of those who are spending below the 73% average, for example, the Provincial Treasury, local government, Department of Local Government, Department of Community Safety, as well as Transport and Public Works. Now, what they all have in common is that they, especially those that have a very low percentage spend, they are the ones that are utilizing in terms of transfer payments as one of their main service delivery implementing mechanisms. So what actually happens within a department, the way the transfer payment agreements are written is that it's based on performance, and especially quarterly performance. So what then happens is that for each of the quarters, payments are actually made only after verified performance by the various receivers of transfer payments, and therefore you see at the end of a quarter, then it appears that it is in terms of slow spending. But as at in the January reporting, I can indicate to the committee that all of these departments have subsequently increased their spending to 75% of spend, because the transfer payments then have been, in terms of performance delivery, has been verified, and therefore transfers have been made by the end of January. So that picture does look very different currently. So moving on, in terms of when we're looking at our public entities similarly spent about 72.4% average of the budget in terms of December. Some in terms of them are indicating some underspending, and at this stage, the underspending really is in terms of Casidra and also the Westgrow, and that is on vacancies were on COE. And then also in terms of the Saldanha IDZ, they are showing in terms of also then an underspending at this stage. And then in terms of the projected over expenditure at this stage was Atlantis Special Economic Zone. And they are also going to be passing another adjustments budget to make sure that they reprioritize within their budget in order to stay within the vote. At this stage, we do not see a risk in terms of over expenditure for either of the public entities. When we look in terms of infrastructure spending now, when you're also looking at infrastructure spending, when you're comparing to the same period in the previous financial year, you see that in this financial year we spent 68%. It is really more than what we've spent percentage-wise when you compare it to last year, where we spent about 64% of our budget. Overall, in terms of that, is doing very well is the Department of Education. They have spent 75%, and then the Department of Health at this stage has recorded spending in terms of 47%. Subsequently to this reporting, we have followed up with the Department of Health in terms of spending. They are looking at reprioritizing and also accelerating in terms of certain projects. I can also indicate in terms of the Department of Health, lots in terms of projects were actually handed over as part of starting in construction phase, or the tender phase has completed in January, and therefore they've indicated to us that the spending performance should improve together with them in terms of reprioritizing their infrastructure budget. When we look at in terms of the actual categories on infrastructure on the next slide, you'll see that it actually then is on par with the previous picture that you saw. So in terms of maintenance spending and in terms of upgrades, there was like at 64% and 67% respectively in terms of spending. Where you see in terms of 73% spending, that is due to the Department of Education, because we have spent in terms of new and replaced infrastructure is about 73% of our spend. Again, I indicate that these numbers do not include the 115 million that education has received for the education infrastructure grant. We then looking at our receipts, and at this stage we are not showing any risk in under collection of receipts. Actually, we've recorded in terms of collection of receipts and departments in terms of collecting own receipts to the value of 90% of the budget thus far. And that is mainly driven by the Department of Human Settlements in terms of previous years' underspending of subsidies by various municipalities, because by this time of the financial year, we finished in terms of the rollover applications of municipalities, and those that the rollover has not been approved, that then needs to be returned to the department, and therefore it's recorded as revenue. And then also in terms of the driver of the 90% collection is in terms of the Department of Health that has collected 88% of its revenue, and then Transport and Public Works via the motor vehicle license fees, mainly in terms of 77% of collection. Then just right at the bottom of that, of the table over there, you'll see then in terms of from the Provincial Revenue Fund, these are now taxes that are paid directly into the Provincial Revenue Fund via the two departments being the Treasury and for gambling, and then liquor license fees via the Department of Community Safety. And there you'll see that we have over-recovered thus far, especially in terms of gambling at this stage, and gambling has picked up subsequent to COVID in terms of going forward. Chair, that is in terms of the additional adjustments budget, and then also the Q3. I have indicated, and if my colleague will just go forward, that we have then provided you some trends in terms of service delivery for each of the departments going forward that will assist in terms of oversight of the various standing committees. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. You have heard that the slides regarding overview of delivery trends, these are extra slides in that particular slide section. We are now going over to the main budget of 2023 slides. Thank you. Member Dugmore.
Chair, so can we not ask questions on this first presentation?
We're doing the questions and answers all at the same time, at the consolidated, just so that we have enough time to do more than one round of questions for members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. So we'll go then straight into the main budget presentation for the 23 medium-term expenditure framework. I'll just introduce it and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Haverman and the team. Just for members to note, as you did in the beginning, Chairperson, there's quite a significant number of documents that come as this pack. What we've dealt with already in our previous presentation are the two items on the right-hand side of this slide, the adjustments estimate and additional adjustments appropriation bill for the current financial year. So what this presentation is now dealing with is the main budget document pack, which is our overview of provincial revenue and expenditure, which has the photographs on the front cover and is that is the narrative overview of the budget. The big blue book, which is the estimates of provincial revenue and expenditure, that covers each of the individual votes. The overview of provincial and municipal infrastructure investment, which provides a deep dive into individual infrastructure projects across the province in that document, and then of course the appropriations bill and associated gazette on allocations to municipalities. These documents really reflect what is a very lengthy, sometimes technical, sometimes more strategic process of budget formulation that happens as part of an annual cycle every year. And what you saw in the Q3 report, of course, is the other part of that cycle, which is the oversight of spending performance on a quarterly basis. But if you go just to the slide on our budget approach, the next slide, thanks, Paul. We actually kick this process off very early in the year. So in the second quarter, we start with the preparation. The second quarter of the financial year, we start with the preparation of the budget, and we'll start again in June, July this year, the preparation of next year's budget. That goes through a number of cycles. at a technical level. The departments make their various preparations, look at their risks, look at their expenditure pressures and needs, and at a strategic level where there's engagement with the executive in terms of executive level priorities related to the strategic framework of the province. And that's then informed as well by a range of other engagements. We start out with, from the Treasury side, with the publication of our Provincial Economic Review and Outlook, which gives us economic intelligence into both economic and social trends in the province, and starts to give an external view of some of the pressures that we're facing. And then that goes into a round of consultations through the Medium-Term Expenditure Committee and Medium-Term Budget Policy Committee processes in the province. This year, the Minister also introduced a Provincial Governance and Budget Council, where she had an opportunity to engage with the heads of finance the executive heads of finance in all of our municipalities, and we have a similar technical process underpinning that, where we engage with the chief financial officers of our municipalities in the course of the budget process, and that obviously goes through 2 cycles. The first cycle leads us to the medium-term budget policy statement that the Minister tabled in the House in November, and the second part of the cycle leads us to the main budget, which was tabled today. So in this presentation, what we will do is we will go very quickly through the economic and fiscal context. Those are issues that we touched on at length in the Provincial Economic Review and Outlook and in the medium-term budget policy statement. So, which is where we typically digest that information. What we're doing is really focusing on updates in that section. Then we'll look at our fiscal framework and response to that, and then we'll look at how we apply the budget policy principles that were articulated in the MTBPS, and then look at the 2023 budget itself. So with that, I'll hand over to Dr. Haverman, who will lead us into the economic and fiscal context.
Thank you very much, HOD, and good afternoon, nearly good evening to the members. I am aware that I have 52 slides, and so I will try and be as quick as possible. Please don't hesitate to keep up questions. This really, Chair, is the document to start off with, which provides a guide to the whole budget. It's our overview of provincial revenue expenditure. If you have a look at the front part of the document, I think the team's done a great job this year in providing a very nice, snappy summary of the whole budget, which summarizes all the key budget statistics, which I'll go through now. But just for members, to read as we're going along, it provides the brief economic overview, which I'll run through now. The provincial fiscal strategy, budget policy and spending plans, the budget aggregates, and then the spatial distribution of spending. And then we do, to assist the committee and the public in understanding the budget, we have key budget statistics. We break down each of the sector budgets, and I'll go through those now and explain how we spend in each of the sectors, and then also just providing more detail on the different types of budgets. So this provides a very quick guide for the committee, and I'm going to run through these things quite quickly now. Feel free to slow me down or speed me up, Chair. But I am keenly aware that we're also tabling, I think we counted, and I really must say, huge effort from the team. We tabled 1,400 pages on budget day, I think is what we got to. And so if the team looks a little bit tired, they really have been working very hard to get through it. Congratulations to them. On the economic outlook, I think we've covered this quite extensively in our engagements. Really, the big new news, of course, is that the growth figures have come out, as the Minister highlighted in her speech, and we've had a contraction in the economy. By some measures, GDP is just over where it was before the pandemic, which is great. And then obviously, I think on the following slide, we speak to some of the issues around energy, which I think if you think about the whole budget it's built around is how do we respond to this energy challenge. And this graph really is quite telling. What it says is that in 2022, we used just about 17% less energy as a province than we used in 2008. Now, if you think about what's happened in the province since 2008, and we have to get by on 17% less electricity than we had in 2008, it gives you a sense of the impact of the energy shortage on the provincial economy, and really goes to what I think the Premier highlighted in the State of the Province address, and the Minister highlighted in the speech, in terms of we've built the budget around a very comprehensive energy response. And we've given members guidance on that in the budget summary chapter. We've got quite an extensive box on page 3 and page 4 explaining exactly all the different components of the energy response. And of course, the cost of load shedding to the provincial economy, we estimate to about 12.8 billion in 2023. On the following slide, the socioeconomic context, also something that we have covered, I think, in the PERO, and we do quite a lot of analysis of it in the documentation. But obviously, the unemployment rate remains quite high, and fortunately, I think we are seeing strong recovery in unemployment or employment rates. We had a really good tourist season. Obviously, that added a lot of additional jobs, and on a net basis, we created 99, I think, % of the jobs of the province, but on a gross basis, 75%. So, by all measures, really a good performance in the Western Cape in terms of unemployment, which is obviously very, very important, and I think reflects a lot of initiatives in terms of, for example, getting air access, making it easier for tourists to visit, etc., etc. So it reflects a lot of proactive things that the provincial government has done. On the following slide, that just paints the national fiscal context, just highlighting the fact that the national government really is constrained by the fact that the economy is not growing particularly fast at the moment. Obviously, the energy constraint has really hit the economy, and so the problem is that it's very difficult to use the fiscal levers to grow the economy, because there is a constraint to how much growth there is, and as a result, a constraint to the amount of fiscal revenue, and that is really, I think, the problem faced by the national government at the moment. And there are obviously forward projections by the national government in terms of the debt stock. At the moment, they are projecting that national debt will stabilize in about 3 financial years' time. And largely, the result of that delay is obviously that a lot of the Eskom debt has been taken onto the national balance sheet. That does need to be paid for in some way. And as we've seen in the past, is that, you have to choose, I guess, priorities at the national level. And obviously, Eskom is a very significant national priority. And so that does mean that they haven't been keeping the provincial equitable share growing in real terms, and that has been quite a significant impact on the province and on health and education expenditure. And that is in that bottom part of that slide, and we go into a little bit more detail in the book, but just highlighting the fact there, if you look at the blue bars, that's the health budget, from the total health budget for the country. I think it's gold is basic education, purple being social development, and light blue being debt service costs. And if you follow the debt service cost bar, you see that it rises to being the biggest spending item in 25-26. And then if you look carefully at the purple, social development, you see it actually comes down in nominal terms. And of course, basic education only slightly rises. And health actually is almost completely flat between 23, 24, 20, and over the MTF. And that's actually quite serious, because this is before you take out the impact of inflation. Okay, that paints the national framework. In terms of the fiscal framework on our side, on the following slide, that just summarizes, I'll speak to each of these in a little bit more detail, the different components of the provincial fiscal framework. As Annalise highlighted there's good news, which is that revenue is doing reasonably well. We obviously track that quite closely. And one of the areas where revenue is doing very well is, oddly enough, on gambling. And so we've revised up our forward forecast of gambling receipts. Also, a lot of good work being done by the Gambling Board to register gambling in the province and to keep up with a lot of different changes, particularly sports betting. So that's good news. The bad news, however, and I'll go into that a little bit more detail when I get to that, is obviously the provincial equitable share, where there are different changes. Actually, let's go to that right now. If we go 2 slides on, that does a breakdown of the changes to the biggest component, obviously, of the budget, which is the provincial equitable share. I'll go through this in a little bit of detail because it's quite important to understand all the different moving parts for the committee. The top line is what the final 2022 MTEF allocation letter provided to the province, which is about 177.4 billion over 3 years. Now, there's been a change to the formula, particularly the risk-adjusted component of health, which has shifted resources from the 2 big provinces, Gauteng and the Western Cape, to more rural provinces, partly because the more rural provinces have higher mortality rates and higher risks. That has meant that we have had a reduction of 1.9 billion over the MTEF to baseline changes. So that's the first thing that happened. And that gives us the technically adjusted provincial equitable share before adjustments to baselines. That's the bad news. On the good news side is that there have been 2 big additions between budgets on the service delivery pressures to all provinces. The first being health pressures to deal with COE backlogs and education pressures. And that adds 2.4 billion over the MTEF for health and 2 billion over the MTEF for education. Many of that has already been included in the M2PS, but we'll come to that in a moment. And then obviously the last component of the additionals to the provincial equitable share is the cost of living adjustment. So the wage agreement that the national government came to added an amount for wages, and that is added to our provincial equitable share. It's 3.2 billion over the MTEF, about $1 billion every single year. So if you take into account all the different moving parts in terms of what is the province's share of the total pot that goes to provinces, so the best percentage for the province, you'll see that it's 10.42% in 2023, 10.38 in 24-25, and 10.35 in 25-26. So it is declining as a share of the total pot, and that's largely because of that change to the risk-adjusted formula. Of course, at the same time, we are one of the fastest growing provinces in terms of population, both us and Gauteng, and we're getting fewer resources. That gives you the total preliminary provincial equitable share over the MTEF, and then what we do at the bottom is we compare the 2022 to 2023 amounts, and you'll see that it's we have got additional amounts, but as I said, that's largely because of the cost of living adjustment on the wages side. Then on the following slide, we go through all the conditional grants, allocations. I think these come up in quite a lot of detail in the individual committees, but just to run through them quite quickly, it's the National School Nutrition Program grant, the Energy Infrastructure grant, Early Childhood Development grant, Health Facility Revitalization, Provincial Roads Maintenance grant, Mass Participation in Sports Development grant. And obviously we've covered the fact that we did get additional allocations on, I think, the education infrastructure grant. We're quite good at spending this money, which is really a credit, I think, to our provincial departments, and we often get money swept from national on that. Then there's also been a change to the National Conditional Grants Framework for Provincial Emergency Housing Conditional Grant. and that has been shifted into the National Department of Human Settlements. And then there's quite a long outstanding issue between us and the national government around the functional shift for agricultural colleges. Constitutionally, higher education is a function of the national government, and so there's a strong view that all the agricultural colleges should be shifted to under a national department. And the problem with our agricultural colleges, it actually predates almost everything. And it's very difficult to actually pull apart what is the college, what is the department, what is provincial land, etc., etc. It has been very, very difficult for us to even estimate what can be done in that area. There have also been a few delays at national, so that shift is not proceeding at the moment. It'll proceed in the future, but it is a risk for us. Okay, so that covers conditional grants. And then that, I think, gives you the outline of where we're coming from. Then we talk to the fiscal strategy. So in developing the fiscal strategy, these are budget principles that have been around for a while now, and they reflect how we think about the budget, which is that we're trying to do four things with the budget. The first is to protect basic services outcomes. The second is to unlock allocative efficiency. The third is to enhance productive efficiency. And the fourth is to enable long-run fiscal sustainability. Just briefly explain what each of those things mean. So in terms of protecting basic services outcomes, what we're trying to achieve there is really just make sure that we do our knitting, which is our core mandated frontline services. Those are health, education, and social development, and that's really where we really make sure we're doing that. Unlock allocative efficiency, so that's we do a lot of work inside the departments to make sure that we're reprioritizing money to make sure that we meet existing plans. Enhance productive efficiency, that's really about making sure that we use our money as well as possible so things around composition of expenditure, etc. Looking at how do we get the best out of our compensation budget. And the final thing that we obviously do is to enable long-run fiscal sustainability. So to make sure that we have a long-run sustainable path for the fiscus. I'll talk briefly about how this budget addresses each of those principles as we go through. So let's start with protecting basic services. I think the Minister highlighted in the speech, really, I think we can all be very proud of the Rapid Build school program. We have, I think the record now is a school in 67 days, which is pretty extraordinary. Obviously, we are, as a province, experiencing rapid learner growth, and so it's been quite important to build additional schools, but also to add classrooms and upgrade classrooms. That is really the addition that the vote will get in 23-24, which is an additional 350 million for that program, which has been going quite well. We're also looking at options about how do we finance that from other sources. Gauteng, for example, received national funding for their schools building program, and we will be following up to see if we can get that money. I think all of these obviously have been highlighted in the speech, but just to run through them quite quickly, we've obviously added money for additional educators. Norms and standards, that's, norms and standards is the money that is allocated to individual schools by the department. And then very important, I think, it's really interesting to see how nutrition, I think, as Minister highlighted in the speech, really fits into the whole cycle of education. So if you can feed children at a younger age, you actually achieve better learning outcomes later, because many children are arriving at school without food. So we've added additional money, and then obviously, food prices are going up at a crazy rate at the moment. So it's quite important to add money for that. Additional money also for autism and learners with profound intellectual disabilities. And then the last one is the additions for the wage increase. So that's vote 5, the big items in vote 5. Then vote 6, the big items are obviously the wage increase, the sustainability of current staff. So we need to make sure that we protect the people in the system at the moment. It was really a big part of this budget. Is the health department got a huge amount of additional money in for COVID. They used that money very carefully. They, as far as possible, didn't hire permanent staff, etc. But now that they're kind of coming out of the COVID thing, then we've got lots of a backlog of services, and as you know, there's also a bit of a long COVID problem and some weird things happening. For example, children don't have immunity to certain diseases because they weren't exposed to them when they were younger, etc., etc. So we have added money to the health budget for many of these things, and so the total additions to the health budget are about 3.9 billion over the MTEF. If you look at the individual budget, you'll still see that the health budget doesn't really grow significantly over the MTEF, and as I highlighted, that's a national issue, and we are on an ongoing engagement with national government to make sure that health gets additional funding. And then also highlighted in the speech, vote 7, social development, additional money for social workers and COE pressures to make sure that, we've seen rising amounts of social economic distress, so we've added money for that. Okay, then the other big part of the budget is this whole new refresh initiative, which is to really try and drive infrastructure spending in the province, to build a strong infrastructure department, and to also have a really strong mobility department. Both of those departments get additional resources over the MTEF. Nearly R1 billion is added to both the mobility and infrastructure votes over the MTEF to help them deliver on these very important mandates. I'm going to go now quite quickly because I don't want us to. We can have questions on every individual one if we need to, Chair, but I'll press ahead unless that's okay.
My advice is let's try to get through everything.
Yes, great.
Because where questions cannot be answered here, there will also be a committee on every single vote as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Great. So then I won't go into terrible detail on each one. Then on the allocative efficiency, the thing that we've been looking at is all the provincial risks and provincial budget policy risks. There are lots of risks. We've discussed many of them already, but I really want to pull out the energy security risk, which is critical to the province. Water security, absolutely critical to the province. I think sometimes we forget water security because we are obsessed with energy security, although they're very closely related, and that's partly why we've done this emergency allocation to municipalities. And the third one is obviously climate change, which is absolutely critical in the long run. I'm not going to go through all the others, but we can pick those up in questions and comments, but they also relate to particular votes. Then on the following slide, this really talks to the big policy direction of the province. So I spoke about the core things that we're trying to achieve. We have to achieve constitutionally as a province, but what we also need to do is make sure that we keep track of these really important areas of driving the province forward. There, it's growth, safety, well-being, and what we call innovation, culture, and governance, which is really about making government work better. So the budget really puts a lot of money down for these three big priorities of the provincial government. I mean, I can't say, I think every single slide has the word on it, so I'll just say it again, energy. It's really difficult to understand how we're going to make the province grow if there isn't a stable supply of energy. So really, really important part of growth for jobs is the energy component. There are other pieces of growth for jobs, ease of doing business, investment, market access, infrastructure work, obviously skills, mobility, and economic resilience. We've added 39.8 billion over the MTEF in total. Well, we've got 39.8 billion over the MTEF in total for growth for jobs, and an additional 709 million is added. I think it's highlighting how important that priority is. Safety, as you know, the LEAP program is one of our flagship programs as a province, working together with the city, and we've also reorganized the violence prevention unit because a lot of, it's actually in the long run probably cheaper for us if we deal with violence where it happens, and because the impact of violence on the rest of the system, particularly the health system and the social development impact, is very significant. And so it's actually better to have a proactive approach to violence. And so we've got one of the big things that we've done in the last 2 years is upskill and upgrade our approach to violence prevention. Then on the well-being side, obviously that's health. I think we've spoken to that. But one of the big things that this budget does is make sure we have enough money for youth development. And then the final thing around innovation, culture, and governance is about making sure that we have a innovative and citizen-centric approach to service delivery. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Another slide with the word energy on it. But what we do here is we break down, as we also did, as Mr. in the speech, the allocations towards energy that we are doing. So there are a number of big initiatives that are on the go. Load shedding impact reduction is really, if you think about them, you can clump them into like things that we're doing right now, things that we're going to do over the next 2 or 3 years, and then things we're going to do over the long run. Right now, load shedding is a problem, obviously. A large chunks of the budget were prepared in the dark, but you know the really big impact of load shedding is that you know our municipalities have to run water systems. They have to pump water. I had the experience of actually being in a municipality that ran out of electricity, and the impact on the municipal water was extraordinary in a small town. So the immediate thing that we've done is obviously allocated money to municipalities for that under using the minister's powers. That was all the justice. But then the next thing that we're really trying to do is obviously get megawatts onto the grid. How we get megawatts onto the grid is largely by helping our municipalities because they are the ones that can be plugged in. And so we are allocating money for what we call project preparation support, which is to really assist them in getting projects together and across the line. There are lots of ideas floating around about how we can actually get a more efficient approach to that. And then the other big thing is the grid. As you probably know, Chair, there are lots of projects that are ready, but there isn't sufficient grid. So we need to plan on grid preparation, generation and financing. And then we also obviously need to hire staff to do all of this stuff. And so that brings us to the sort of key energy categories and what we're spending over the MTEF. We've then put away a lot of money in reserve. So that's at the bottom part. There are lots of projects that are still being developed. As you know, the Premier's appointed an energy advisor, LV Lester, and we are rolling out huge initiatives with big municipalities. We're looking at a whole bunch of different options, but we're really, as far as possible, looking at finding money that we will allocate. We've got some ideas in our minds, but we do want to create a pool of money that we can use for that. Okay, that talks about energy. I'm trying not to talk about energy in the following slides.
Do you want a break?
I can have a break, yes. Thank you.
So the next part of our fiscal strategy is around how we deal with the productive efficiencies and how we produce our services. Are we doing them as efficiently and effectively as possible? So the key areas that one needs to look at to build productive efficiency is in the way in which we produce our services. Is around, obviously, for a provincial government, compensation of employees. We're largely a people business, nurses, teachers, administrative support staff around that, and so forth. But we also need to look at our transfers and how we build our capital assets, the platforms on which we deliver our services. We, as a provincial government, spend a lot of time in the background also working on the systems by which we achieve efficiencies in those 3 areas: our supply chain management systems, our financial systems that give us the data on what's going on, and we're using now, as we reported to the committee before, a series of expenditure reviews to really understand the dynamics and the long-run trends associated with individual service areas and how we can find better ways of doing business that allow us to do more with less. There's some great examples of that, which I won't go into now. But if we look then across economic classification, how's our expenditure of the province as a whole divided up? Unsurprisingly, you will see that compensation is our largest portion of expenditure, and that remains pretty stable has remained pretty stable over time and will remain relatively stable over the MTB over the medium term at around 51 going to 52%. Why that's important is not only because our teachers and nurses and doctors are key to the services that we deliver, and our social workers, but also the costs associated with compensation are very sticky, and so can get you into fiscal distress if they're not very carefully managed, responsibly managed. And I think that one of the things that we've managed to do is make sure that as the largest spending item on our budget, we do have not a one-size-fits-all strategy across the votes, no kind of complete ban on hiring. In fact, you're seeing in our frontline services efforts to hire. If you go and look at headcounts in education, you will see continued growth in headcounts in education. The minister announced on social workers as well, continued growth in the number of social workers. So management of compensation is key, and I'll come back to that a little bit. The second is around transfers the second biggest area for the province is around actually goods and services, of which we will be spending 56.3 billion rand over the next 3 years. That remains relatively stable as a portion of our spending. But on some items we're exposed to inflationary increases. Particularly imported items and pharmaceuticals, medical-related supplies. So that it is an area we need to continually seek efficiencies in how we're purchasing as government to make sure that we're getting value for money in our purchasing, and that's why you see continued attention to that issue from the provincial treasury. A number of things that we do in the background, working with our suppliers, working with our purchasing departments in that respect as well. And then transfers and subsidies, which is about 40 billion over this MTEF, a little over that. Transfers and subsidies are where we're really partnering with other entities outside of the provincial government. There can be transfers to municipalities, transfers to provincial entities, transfers to non-profit organizations, and so forth. In fact, one of the largest transfers we make to non-profit institutions is actually to our schools, to our school governing bodies, who are responsible for the governance of their schools. That's not to pay teacher salaries. That's norms and standards transfers to those entities. And then another significant area we make payments is in the social development space, where we partner with a lot of non-profit organizations who provide core social care, who we partner with in providing core social care services for children, for older people, and so forth across the province. And then finally, the fourth item there is around payments for capital assets. Now, this is a portion of our infrastructure spending. Our total infrastructure spending is running at a little over 30 billion over the MTEF, more than 10 billion a year, as the minister indicated in her speech. Payments for capital assets amounts to about 20 billion rand of that. The remainder of that infrastructure spending is things that we're spending on maintenance and the like, in terms of maintaining our assets, which is not a payment for a capital asset per se. To then go to the next slide, if you look at in terms of productive efficiency, compensation spending per vote is something that's really quite critical for us to manage as a province. As I was indicating, What we have agreed in the province is that we're going to have bespoke strategies across different departments. They're allowed to develop they're required to develop their own strategies that show how they're managing costs and managing headcounts over time. And while responding to their service delivery needs. So you can see that has continued, that has actually been a successful strategy for the province. We're not looking at trying to drive headcounts down in the province. But what we are going to be looking for is making sure that two things can happen. The first is in our frontline services, that we're keeping pace with growing demand for our services in health, in our classrooms, with social workers, and so forth. And secondly, that we are managing to ensure that our staff are productive in all aspects of their working days. So that there's a real return on investment in that. And that comes from a range of sources. It can come from effective use of training, strengthening of management skills, and so forth. And so those are all parts of a discussion on staff productivity and culture that is underway as part of the broader governance journey in Western Cape government. There is, however, one thing that is key to note in this budget, and particularly for Vote 6, the Department of Health, is that they are having to, as Dr. Hoverman said, post-COVID, constrain their headcount. They had contract workers that were part of responding to COVID. This is something we looked at very, very closely and with great concern as to what they could reasonably expected to do given the shrinkage of resources that was available to them, and how we could protect them as much as possible from a diminution in headcount. They've looked at this issue closely themselves, and I'm sure in the committee we'll be able to go into considerable detail on this, but are largely going to be managing the slight decline in headcount in the vote from attrition, natural attrition, resignations, retirements, and some non-renewal of contracts that was already scheduled to take place, given the size of that vote and headcount in that vote. So the next slide just gives an overview, and I think just reinforces the point of how significant health and education are in terms of the total employee base of the province. 46,000, nearly 47,000 staff in Department of Education, 35,000 in health. The next closest then being social development with 2,700 people, leading up to the 93,000 personnel employed by the province. So the overwhelming majority of people who work for us and with us in the Western Cape government are teachers, they're nurses, they're doctors, and the like, and that is, of course, as it should be. When we look at goods and services, again, one's going to see that Department of Health spends over half the amount of goods and services that are spent by the province as a whole. That's, of course, because a lot of inputs, often quite expensive medical inputs, both equipment and pharmaceuticals, are in the health space. Comparatively less pricey, more standardized items in the education space, which is just a little under 20% of our total goods and services spending. And then, as you would expect, I think some in the Department of Infrastructure, nearly 13% of total goods and services spending, a lot of that associated with the roads program and other forms of infrastructure delivery, and then some of that again in the Department of the Premier, particularly, I think, driven by broadband spending, among other things. When we look at transfers, that third category that I spoke of, that 40 billion rand over the 23 MTEF, as I mentioned, that green block shows you the transfers to non-profit institutions, and those are largely to schools. The transfers to households, a lot of that, which includes transfers in terms of housing programs, is comparatively smaller. That's the blue block right on the top, the light blue block right on the top, and then much smaller amounts to municipalities, public corporations, and departmental agencies as a total of all transfers in the province. And then finally, on infrastructure investment, I think we're particularly happy that we've continued to push infrastructure investment in the province as part of the Growth for Jobs strategy, both in its own right and in terms of the catalytic effects that infrastructure can have. So that's now over the 10 billion mark a year across the province as a whole for the MTEF, up to 32.6 billion over the 23 MTEF. The vast bulk of that is into maintenance. It's the largest investment category. We, of course, have quite an extended infrastructure stock, which doesn't mean we don't need to add to it, but it does mean we also need to maintain what we do have, and that's in terms of schools, clinics, hospitals, roads that we do have that do need ongoing maintenance. Most of the maintenance budget lies within the Department of Infrastructure, particularly transport infrastructure, which is where roads lies, and so that's a very significant part of the portfolio. But there are significant investments that are being made in our rapid school building program that we've spoken about before, and in our health infrastructure. The top 10 infrastructure projects are just laid out in this next slide. This is top 10 by value, sorted by value. You'll see the education, infrastructure, health and wellness, and a lot of this reflects just the nature of the assets that they have under management. You see a plethora of maintenance and repairs projects there because those are programmatic, repeated investments in our existing capital stock. I think one thing to note, and I'll come back towards this at the end, is that with the transfer of, with the creation of the new Department of Infrastructure, Human Settlements is now part of that Department of Infrastructure, and so you're seeing it reflected accordingly in the column on the far left, and the sector column just gives you an indication that there are very significant human settlements projects that are underway. We've also, in the next slide, I think it just outlined and there is extensive information on this, the spatial distribution of planned infrastructure in the province by district over the MTEF. And I won't go into all that much more detail around this now, but I would note two things. The first is in the OPRI, which is the book with the colorful cover. There is an entire chapter on the spatial distribution of spending as a whole across the province. That's chapter 6, and that goes into quite significant detail on overall provincial spending. There is a companion book to that, which is the overview of provincial and municipal infrastructure investment, which looks at infrastructure investment and the spatial distribution of infrastructure investment in even more detail. What's important about that is that it goes down and lists the projects in some of the annexes, and gives a lot of detail on the nature of infrastructure programs, where they are located. And this slide literally gives you a summary of that. But if you are interested in, infrastructure projects that are going to be happening in the Hessequa area, in Hessequa municipal area, you can find all of that information in that book. You can trace and correlate that information back to the departmental chapters in the big, thick blue book, to the vote chapters. So if it's a school in Hessequa, you will find the school there, and you will find that same school being reflected in the vote chapter on the tables they provide on infrastructure in the thick book. So there's a lot of information that's provided around infrastructure. What we've tried to do is provide the high level analytics so that from an oversight perspective, you can see what are the net effects, where's this money going, but also you can kick the tires on what it's actually building in terms of infrastructure investments. And if you go to the next slide, that just then gives you, I think, another sight of the sorts of, not from a sectoral perspective, but from a functional perspective, where that 32.6 billion rand then is being deployed across the transfers for new or replacement infrastructure, rehabilitation, renovation, upgrading and additions, and repairs and maintenance on the infrastructure portfolio. But as I say, really significant information and a standalone publication in the form of the OPMI that is there as well. So having given Dr. Haberman a bit of a break, I'll now pass back to him.
Thank you very much, AJD. Yes, so I mean, a core thing about what the budget tries to achieve is long-run fiscal sustainability. So as you know, and we will bring preliminary results from our fiscal futures report, which we've finalized now, the first set of results, which is to really think, and we've been discussing this, I think, with the committee, and we go into a bit of detail in it in the book, is really, you know, we know what is happening. We can kind of foresee many of the future trends. People are moving towards the province. If you have a look at the OPMI, you'll see that we know that there is a sort of increase in population growth in certain key areas. Bateau being a big example, Mossel Bay, George area, Overstrand, so that includes obviously the town of Hermanus and that area, and then Saldanha and the city are growing very, very fast. But people are moving out of Beaufort West and the Central Karoo district towards the city for a whole variety of reasons, climate change being one of them, etc. So we need to plan forward for all these different things, and that really is how do we make sure that we have enough money to do that over the long run. In the intermediate time, what we'll be doing is obviously making sure that we have sufficient reserves. Now, these are always, we hope, theoretical reserves for unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure, for example. But as we've just seen that, you know, towards the end of this financial year, we had to spend some of that money for the generators. Chair, you will remember that I think last financial year, or was it the financial year before that, we had to make quite significant drought expenditures. Some of it was funded by NAFTA, etc. Touch wood, we are in March and we haven't had a major fire. But as you know, there are those sorts of big things that we have to always keep money aside for. The other big reserve that we've allocated money for is the energy reserve over the MTIF, which is, as I said, I think every time I present, maybe HOD took all the slides that didn't have energy on them. That really is the story. On the following slide, so that gives you a summary of all the changes that have happened vote by vote from MTIF to MTIF. We've spoken through most of them, but just to flag, I think we've spoken to all the big ones. Most of the increases relate to compensation increases, so additional spending for the wage settlement for some of the votes. I think we've spoken to all of the big ones, particularly education, health and wellness, and social development. As the HOD highlighted, education, there are lots of additional posts. And we spoke about the infrastructure items there. And then the other addition is for police oversight and community safety, vote 4 in the 25-26 financial year, which is for the LEAP program. So there's additional amounts there. The total additions in over the MTIF in this MTIF to MTIF are 12.7 billion, and we'll go through quickly run through that's a lot of tables. We've got some pie charts in the following slide just to highlight, what that looks like relatively vote to vote. I think we both made the point that education, health and wellness are the two big spending items. But infrastructure, obviously very important, comes just behind that. I think, if I remember correctly, over the MTEP, this is the first time that we've crossed the 30 billion mark for infrastructure over the MTEP. So really big infrastructure push. Some of the infrastructure money is in education and health and wellness because they drive a lot of our infrastructure spending. Obviously, the Rapid Schools Build program is actually in the education budget. The OPMI does quite a good job of explaining how that all fits together. And then HD's discussed the spatial distribution. This is a very important thing for us to keep track of because, you know, as I said, we need to make sure that we are quite equitable in how we spend money across the province. The OPRI has a very nice box just summarizing what our colleagues in health are doing to make sure that there's an equitable allocation of money across the province, making sure that we don't, take quite a scientific approach to looking at where are we seeing disease burdens, where's population growing, et cetera, to make sure that we allocate money effectively across the whole province. Then the next slide.
It's just a wrap up.
Which I hand back to you.
Great. Thank you. Yes, so I think I won't take all that much more time other than to say that, the budget is focused a lot on how we allocating according to the strategic priorities of the province in terms of growth for jobs. And I think the big item here is particularly in terms of the energy response at this point. And while that's still unfolding, there were clearly some immediate issues that required attention from the budget and have received that attention accordingly. We are anticipating, but by the time we come to adjust the budget in November, we would be able to allocate even further the resources that are being set aside for the energy response. But while economic growth is clearly a priority for the province, and the other priorities are interlinked with that. The first being safety, which arguably is a critical prerequisite for faster economic growth. And there's significant allocations towards the safety priority as that program continues to unfold. And then, of course, the core mandate of the province really is around citizen well-being and in our education and health and social development portfolios. And they're not only where the bulk of our resources sit to begin with, but where the bulk of new allocations are made as well, and particularly in growing our teacher cohorts and our social worker cohorts, and then interventions right across the province in transversal systems that are important to making sure that we're a well-functioning government that is able to constantly seek out efficiencies and effective and more effective ways of doing things. As we've mentioned already, that I think a big part of this budget is that 32.6 billion rand that is being put into infrastructure over the medium-term period. So over 10 billion rand a year, and that will we hope is something we'd be able to continue growing from this point, depending on our future fiscal outlook. But I think is already a very significant allocation reflecting the priority with which attached to not just the maintenance of assets, but also the growth of our asset base in order to continue to deliver services. We've kept, I think, in this budget a very we kept our core pressures for education, health and social development firmly in sight and have responded to them to make sure that our services are sustainable, our service packages are sustainable over this medium term. One of the areas of that is making sure that we manage compensation effectively. And we've continued, I think, with our strong track record in compensation management in both setting upper limits to compensation spending, but getting effective, bespoke vote level strategies on headcount and total compensation over the medium term in place, and that's really delivered the goods for us in terms of a stable health platform, stable personnel platform in the province across all of our departments. And then finally, I think to ensure fiscal sustainability, we are focusing on rebuilding our reserves, our capacity to respond to future shocks. And Dr. Haverman had talked through the amount that were being set aside for various purposes over this MTEF. The final point I would make is that there is one administrative change associated with refresh that members will note, is that Vote 8 in all of these documents is now the new Department of Mobility. Vote 8 used to be attributed to the Department of Human Settlements. That department doesn't exist from 1 April. And so these documents all refer to Vote 8, the Department of Mobility. The Vote 10, which used to be the Department of Transport and Public Works, the same applies, and that from 1 April will be the Department of Infrastructure. And so in all of these documents here, is reflected as the Department of Infrastructure. And so I hope that that's clear. Chairperson, Minister, I don't know if you wanted to make any closing remarks. But Chairperson, otherwise I'd hand back to you, and very happy, of course, to take questions.
Thank you so much. The procedural officer has informed me there are 13 members in the House, in the committee. So I'm going to ask that for questions and answers, we keep our questions to 2 each so that I can allow more than 1 round of questions, please. I'm going to now see the hands from members. Member America, Member Mkondlo, Member Fry. I see Member Murray online. Ms. Kamish Ahmed, if you can just check if there's anything. Member Brancanes and Member Mvimbi, in that order. Thank you. 2 questions each so that I can have another round of questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Mr. Savage, and the Minister for what you have presented to us today. I am, without a doubt, mindful as he has reminded us about all the work that have gone into this by an exceptional, talented team of officials that make the Western Cape provincial government and proud. Thanks a lot, Arasa. Chairperson, I shall respect your determination and your guidance. 2 questions, and I'm going to utilize my first 2 questions to the adjustment budget, and in the second round I'll go to the main budget. And it's on page 3 of the additional adjusted expenditure estimate. Now, and as I was going through this, questions came to mind, and as Ms. Pick was explaining the allocation, it became clearer. But my question, and just to local government, the 88.8 million rand that's been sort of appropriated for as a response to these blackouts. Now, and it is obviously we all know, are aware of the various allocations that were made to municipalities. How's the accountability and reporting of the expenditure of that amount going to take place, given the fact that the financial year of local government ends in June or July, I think. And, we know that municipalities are very slow with regard to spending money that is earmarked for capital sort of projects. That's the one question, Chair, and I'm just going to, it's difficult for me now to prioritize the importance of the questions that I want to ask. But I'm going to I'm going to stick to this page. Which page is this? It's the socioeconomic picture through PSIP outcomes indicators. I'm just going to go to well-being. It's, I don't know the page, that doesn't look like it. There it states that needs aged between 15 and 34 has decreased in the third quarter by 5,262 from the previous quarter. Now, can you perhaps just assist me to understand the context of that sort of figure? What's the percentage does it represent from the previous quarter, if or perhaps any other sort of explanation as to provide me a little more context? Chairperson, with respect, I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There will be another round. Member Mkontlo.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me try and start in the quarter three performance. I'm sure I can try and push one question there, and then I maybe ask my second question in the budget. If I don't say this question, I'll have to come back. Where is it now? Let me leave it. Chair, maybe on the 1.1 billion that Minister has spoken to, emanating from the Premier's State of the Province. I'm going to use my two questions on it since I'm not seeing now, so that I don't delay. I just wanted to understand that this 1 billion, is it from the reserve fund, the provincial revenue, is it reserve fund, if I'm not mistaken, or from the main appropriation? My second question, Chair, is that how is this institutional arrangement of this energy resilience? I see she mentions that partly it's going to be housed by the Premier's office at 95.9 million. What exactly is this money going to do? Are you going to set up a new unit or function within the Premier? So what exactly is this money for? And actually between, I'm not sure whether DDET is going to play any role, or actually it is the Premier's office who's going to coordinate all the projects that are related. I don't want to go to those projects now because there will be extra questions. I then just wanted to understand that, and if there are any consultants that are going to be paid to actually assist in the implementation of this energy project. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Member Frye.
Thank you, Chair. Wow, what a time to be alive. I'm not sure how this is going to be. It looks sexy, but anyway. My question is regarding the one is the receipts on slide 12. If you break down the Provincial Revenue Fund tax receipts, horse racing seems to be something that's gone through the roof in 2021, 2022. It went from 212 to 350 million. Is that just pure tax receipts? Is it a growth in the industry? Do we see more people trying to gamble to get their way out of debt? What is that? And then I might be encroaching on my time, but in vote 5, cost of living impact of a 3% wage increase, that is 430 million. Is that enough? And is there also the impact of the increase of teachers of 1,176 teachers that will be added to the cohort? I don't see where that has been, although it could be in here somewhere. If that has been included in the estimation. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Murray online.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I was very interested in the increased amount of revenue that was received at a municipal level and then also from the Western Cape Gambling and Racing Board. I wanted to get some clarity from the
Marie,
department.
apologies for interrupting you. Maybe if you just sit closer to the laptop, we are struggling to hear your question.
Okay, Chair, is that better?
Just quickly
Okay.
try, please.
I'm just going to try one second.
Okay. I'm going to ask that the members in the House, it is a little bit clearer when you put the, what's the device? You put the device in your ears. Thanks.
Okay. May I proceed, Chair?
Yes, you may. It's much clearer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I was very interested to hear that there had been an increase in revenues received in the first slide with regards to municipalities and the Western Cape Gambling and Racing Board. From the department, I would be interested to know how the ratio on revenue on revenue on accounts receivable was calculated. I understand that this can be quite subjective. And then my second question, Chair, is HOD touched on, and this was in the second slide, how revenue would be impacted as a result of load shedding. And I'm particularly interested in how programs like MERS, for example, might impact on revenue collection from municipalities in their implementation and how that would be addressed through the budget process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Member Brancais.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, Chair, on the adjustment budget in terms of the energy security, my question to the department, let me say that thank you very much to the department for that presentation. And I will support this budget if the department can ensure that in the next week or two, it's the upcoming holy month of Ramadan for Muslims here in the Western Cape. Most of the Muslims in South Africa stays in the Western Cape and especially here in the city of Cape Town. Now, in terms of the energy security, the month of Ramadan, we have a program as Muslims in the morning. We have to start our fast by preparing. And especially at that time, we are talking about between 5 a.m. in the morning and 7 a.m. in the morning. And then at night when we break our fast, that we are looking at times in between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. for the upcoming month of Ramadan. So I want to ask the department, is there somehow, can a plan be made somehow to accommodate the Muslims here in the, especially in the city of Cape Town and all over the Western Cape, to reduce the load shedding times in terms of us preparing for our fast and breaking our fast at these various times that I've mentioned now. Thank you very much, Chair.
Member Brancais, I just want to check if that's your only question.
Yes, Chair, that's my only question. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much. Member Mvimbi.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes, thank you.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions, but in complying with your requirement of 2 questions, I'm going to try very hard to try and summarize my question into 2. The first one, Chairperson, I think it's more more relating to, I think, slide 4 that was presented regarding the budget process. And if you look into that, because it's a question I always ask all the time, if you look at it, it's clear that there is no public participation process that their department is actually Department of the Treasury that is embarking upon in terms of engaging and involving the public of the Western Cape and in the process. So I just want to check as to whether what public participation process has the department or the government of the Western Cape embark upon in involving the people of the Western Cape in the compilation of the budget, because I saw the budget process, according to the presentation, it starts in June. So, and in all that, you will see it's only departments. It's basically we are talking to ourselves. We are actually consulting ourselves in terms of that. So I might be getting it wrong. There might be other forums that the department has got, but in terms of public participation for the budget so that we can produce what we call people's budget. I just want to check whether does the department embark on that. The second question will relate to the 1 billion rand that was announced by the Premier and also now further emphasized by the Minister in the budget as I was actually reading through it. And somehow it does get confusing, but also it might give a lot of explanation, maybe by responses, maybe it might help in clarifying the matter further, because it's also being broken down. And I went through the minister's speech. It says there are actually 4 pillars, and they mentioned some of those. And I think Honorable Nkondlo has actually touched on that in terms of municipalities that might be involved. I just want to check then, and when I look at it, there is a round figure or a figure of 57 million that is earmarked for municipalities. There's another one, 24 million for DDET. So now I know also there is an 88 million rand emergency that was actually mentioned somewhere, but also I know there's also another 88 million that has been gazetted for emergency. Is it the same amount of money, or which is which really? I would like to have more explanation in terms of that, and whether is it also part of the 1 billion rand for that is meant for energy contingencies. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. Minister and HOD, you can allocate the questions accordingly.
I'll give it a first try. Thank you, honourable members, for the questions. Starting with you, Honourable America, thank you very much for the lovely words for the PT team, which I firmly agree with. Your first question was on the adjustment budget regarding accountability and reporting for the emergency funding. As a control mechanism, we've asked municipalities to sign transfer payment agreements so that we can ensure compliance with the conditions of the grant framework. We have also asked the Department of Local Government as the oversight body to publish regular reports on the progress of the uptake of the municipalities of this of the beneficiary municipalities, to make sure that those funds are in fact spent as they should be and in line with the prescripts. Because of the manner in which this money was allocated, we wanted to make absolutely sure that there were very strict conditions attached to that. Then there were a number of questions on the 1.1 billion rand allocated to energy from both Honourable Nkondlo and Honourable Mvimbi. So while I'm on the emergency allocation of the 88 million to municipalities, that comes from the current financial year, from the 2022-23 budget, which is in process at the moment. That is not included in the 1.1 billion for the main budget. So just to separate those two things out. So to answer Honourable Mvimbi's question, the 88 million for backup generation is not a part of the 1.1 as set out. Then to try and kind of separate it, because there's a lot going on in the energy programs, 598 million is allocated to reduce the impact of load shedding, to boost the green economy, to set up a pipeline of energy projects, supporting municipalities, etc. And then 501.5 million comes from the reserve, the energy reserve. So approximately half comes from the reserve and the other half not. There are the 4 pillars, but across those 4 pillars, there are different departments that are responsible for delivering different elements of it. So the Department of the Premier gets 95.9 million rand. The Department of the Premier will be leading and coordinating and driving components of the Western Cape Energy Resilience Programme. So that includes things like emergency power packs for vulnerable households, that will be preparing the integrated resource plan, the municipal pooled buying project, and the demand side management programme. Then the Department of Infrastructure gets 148.7 million rand to drive municipal independent power producer procurement, so IPP procurement at the municipal level, and that includes project preparation, grid infrastructure development work, and exploring gas power. Then 60 million rand goes to Westgrow and Freeport Saldanha to enable green hydrogen development for longer term energy. DDAT, Economic Development and Tourism, gets 24 million to improve energy resilience in municipalities, as well as 55 million to support SMMEs to implement alternative energy supply systems. And then finally, the local government department gets 57.5 million to help municipalities pilot renewable energy solutions. And that's again with specialists to try and understand what are the best fit renewable energy options, as well as for those municipal energy master plans, which is all part of the research that needs to be done to make sure that they can do the right thing. And that is also then financially responsible. Then there were some questions from Honourable Fry on receipts and horse racing and the cost of living wage increases. If I could hand over to you, HOT, as well as the questions from Honourable Murray on the increase in revenue and how that's calculated and what the impact of load shedding might be on that. And then Honourable Brinkcase, this is the thing, is that load shedding has such severe impacts on everybody, and I can only imagine how difficult it must be when you need to break your fast and you don't have any power to prepare food. This, unfortunately, is not something that can be solved within the next week, but be assured that we're doing everything possible to try and become as independent of Eskom as quickly as possible so that we can have more certainty and ensure that we have a much more stable power supply so that all residents can live their lives in a meaningful way. Then over to you, HOT, and please fill in if I've left off any details.
Great, thank you, Minister. We will go to Department of the Premier. We'll ask to deal with Member America's NEET's question that was in their contribution to the presentation. The Minister, I think, Honourable America, had spoken to how we're dealing with the accountability environment for the emergency allocations to municipalities. There is a monthly reporting requirement. There are transparency requirements as well. We are obviously, this is an emergency allocation, so expenditures are being they're in a controlled environment, and we're overseeing it, but we're wanting expenditures to be executed quickly as well. So our intention is that these expenditures are almost being executed in real time. As we understand it, as at yesterday, there was about 56 million of that had already been that funding had already been transferred to municipalities, and spending was underway in that respect. The slight delay between the authorization and the transfers was around getting the right accountability framework in place. But one's got to make sure we get both of those. It's not an either or in an emergency environment. We've got to get speed with accountability, and that's what we're working at. We're not anticipating at this point that there would be any rollovers beyond the municipal financial year, which, as you will know, ends on the 30th of June. But because of the emergency nature of the expenditures in that regard. Honourable Nkondlo, you asked around is this from the reserves or appropriated? We've split the 1.1 billion is split into two parts, if I'm getting your question correctly here. The first part is what can be allocated now, okay, which is proposed for appropriation now. And the second part is where we see a pipeline of projects that weren't quite ready for appropriation now, and that's been left in the reserves. So that's not being appropriated now. So there are two parts to the 1.1 billion, but we have a fair sense of what's required or needed in reserves for each year of the MTEF. If you go to page 110 in the OPRI, in the book with the colourful book, you can see those you can see those numbers in terms of the exact allocations per project. So that's a summary of the allocations per project that correlates with what the Minister has spoken to, and page 3 and 4 of the OPRI as well. So page 110 and page 3 and 4 page 3 and 4 gives a narrative overview of the program. Page 110 gives the detailed breakdown of the program. Why certain things are ending up in certain departments is related to mandates and capabilities, which is something we always concern ourselves with from the Treasury perspective. The Department of the Premier is taking a leading role in the coordination of the varying elements of the program. The Municipal Energy Resilience team is, I understand, moving to the Department of the Premier to provide the core of that coordination capability in the across the province. You asked the question of whether any consultants would be paid here. There is a need for transaction advisory services. So, for example, if you're going to enter into, as a municipality, you're going to enter into a long-term offtake agreement with an independent power producer. You've got to be absolutely certain that you've modeled the fiscal implications of it, that you are legally and have other regulatory compliances in place before you can sign those contracts. That's a difficult process. That's typically where you do use transaction advisors to make sure that you get the best deal for the municipality. And it's something we would certainly encourage when you're making a long-term commitment of that, or any long-term commitment in an area that you maybe not have immediate or recent experience in. And so that is the case with many of our municipalities, and I think that there will be transaction advisors. Those are typically people who do come in on a consulting basis. You don't want to employ them in perpetuity in a municipality. It's a specialized skill, but in many cases it's a one-off skill. It would be very expensive for our municipalities to try and employ them in perpetuity. So it's just a short way of saying that I think that that there will be some consultants that be part of a project preparation process. That's not unusual, both from a financial and an engineering perspective. I will ask, I think, Shirley Robinson to deal with the question. Malcolm will deal with the question on the own revenues, on the gambling revenues from Member Fry and Members Fry and Murray. Annalise, would you be able to deal with the question on the COLA, the cost of living adjustments, in education? Member Murray, you asked how municipal electricity revenues will be assisted. That's a longer debate that's actually been quite well covered in the press. This budget doesn't attempt to cover municipalities' revenue shortfalls from the structural transition that's underway in the electricity sector. We are well aware of the challenges that municipalities are facing as that revenue source is increasingly constrained. It does emphasize the need for urgent action and so forth, but it's not going to be solved through a fiscal intervention of giving municipalities more money. It is a structural adjustment in the composition of revenues that they're going to have to navigate through. We do provide actually a lot of assistance to municipalities in varying aspects of their revenue management frameworks and so forth, and we are in the process of tailoring some of that on request into the energy space. What is clear is that municipalities are going to have to completely refurbish their revenue models in the electricity sector to cope with a completely different environment. And technical support we'd obviously always be happy to give in that respect. Member Mbimbi, you asked then, I think, the final question on the public participation process. We do have a discussion on page 105 of the OPRI on citizen engagement in the budget process. As I did mention, I mean, there have been a number of engagements, both technically within government, but also with local government and local government representatives. The minister of this cycle also launched the Messages for Murray campaign, which was a direct outreach to citizens for direct input into the budget process. The province does do extensive surveying of citizen experiences of services, citizen demands for services, and so forth. And I think a lot of that you're seeing in the narrative on page 105 and 106, which is feeding into the budget process, often through departmental votes. And then the final thing that I would note is that, you know, a lot of spending, for example, transfers to school governing bodies, is also subject at the budget point, at the service point, which is the school in this instance, to public participation processes by parents in voting on the school budgets for each school each year. And so there are processes that have to be followed in that respect, which are really at the service points as well. And there are different but not dissimilar processes in the health space with clinic committees and so forth. Minister, do you want to add to that?
Yes, if I may, Chair. Just on the public participation, so the teams did have a kind of roadshow for the Pero and Mero, and even engaged with the Children's Commissioner, so that children also had the opportunity to engage with some of the budget documentation. And of course, we even had a pop-up at First Thursdays for budget messages. So we really have tried to increase public participation throughout the budget process, right from the very beginning to the end. Thank you.
And if I may hand over first to, I think, Zinat Ismail, are you able to deal with the NEETs question, Zinat?
Thank you, HUD. Also, I'm just going to go into the NEETs question. If one look at what NEET stands for, it is the number of youth, and that youth is 15 to 35. Not employment, so which means they are not in employment, not in education or any training. And that figure, as per the cabinet submission, is standing for quarter 3, is standing at 803,635. And if one look at the previous quarter, although the submission for quarter 3 doesn't make provision for quarter 2, but if one compares those two cabinet submissions that was issued, then or the integrated performance report, then one can make the comparisons between the quarter 3 and the quarter 2, and then one can clearly see how the number of youth not in employment, not in education or in training have increased or decreased. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I'll go to Mr. Boyson on the gambling taxes.
Thank you, HOD. It's just important to remember that during 2020-21, gambling activity, and specifically land-based gambling, came to a standstill due to the closure of the industry. What has happened, there was also a disruption in the industry with the advent of online sports betting. So this created an opportunity, and more punters then made use of online sports betting. So the industry then recovered across all sectors, the casinos, the LPM sector, and in the totalizer, and also the bookmakers. But we've noted significant growth in online sports betting. And I think this was also brought about by the Gambling Board, which proactively created an environment for sports betting to flourish, and then also responding positively to licensing requests from applicants, and then also offering new contingencies which are permissible for betting. Thank you.
Annelies.
Thank you, Chair. So the question is on education, and it's around the COE. And actually, the question has two parts. The one, and I'll start with the second part in terms of the increase in the number of teachers and the cohorts of teachers. And the member is quite correct in terms of it is over about 1,700 almost. That's the increase. But what we also need to remember is when that increase is happening. So in the increase, 1,143, what we've budgeted in the 2022 budget already is taken care of. And so therefore, that is in the base. So what we are now looking at is over and above that 1,143, we are now making provision for about 430 additional to that as well. So you'll see only the 430 increase in terms of funding increase, and that on that slide 18 you'll see, and slide 18 you'll see in terms of, we're saying educator basket growth, and that is increasing in terms of from 64, 201 and 211 over the MTEF. So it's like 477, but we are allowing for a staggered growth, meaning, well, staggered increase, meaning the full 430 teachers we wouldn't be able to recruit from the 1st of April. So what we are making the assumption therefore is that we will have the full 430 really only from December 2023 onwards. Therefore, you see 64 million rand allocation, and then the full allocation of plus minus 200 million for the 430 additional in year 2 and year 3 of the MTEF. So we need to see 2022 base of the one over the 1,000 teachers, and then the 430 in the 2023 allocation that I just explained. So that takes care in terms of why you don't see necessarily that increase in teachers for the 2023 budget. Then in terms of the cost of living adjustments, in terms of the 3%, so just so that we all clear, the 3% cost of living is in terms of the wage agreement of the 2022-23 that was concluded. And so this is the carry through effect. Now we are, and we will do also with all 3 of the departments in terms of the frontline departments, we're also clear with them our calculations, and they also have agreed with it. So for example, this amount in the current financial year amounted to about, in terms of 396 million rand in the current financial year. What we've then allowed is for that additional heads that we are employing. We've already allowed for some growth of that. Again, you'll see the reason why for the dip. So in our opinion, yes, we are covered completely for education on the cost of living in the carry through effect from the current year.
That's a different question to the budget.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Speaker. I don't know, colleagues, have all your questions been responded to? Mr. Savage, have we exhausted all the questions?
Sorry, Chairperson, I think we covered the first round of questions. I'm obviously happy to take more.
Right, thank you. Open the floor for second round of questions. Can we once again stick to maximum 2 questions per member? Have indication of recognize Ms. Murray online, Honourable Wimby, and who's the other? Honourable Brinkhuis in that order, and then Honourable Nkondlu, and I recognize myself also afterwards. Okay, colleagues, right, Honourable Murray, if you are ready to present your 2 questions now, you may recognize you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, unfortunately, my question with regards to the ratio for calculating accounts receivable wasn't answered, but perhaps to give some clarity around the question. So the reason I asked the question was because I understand that calculating the amount of money that may not be paid back by a receivable account can be subjective in nature. And so I wanted to get some clarity on how that was calculated. And the reason I wanted to get clarity is I wanted to understand if it would be adjusted in future, given the high revenues, and as a result of that, how would that funding be allocated in the next accounting process? Then my next question, Chair, is to what extent was the GPJ strategy taken into account when putting this budget together? I understand that the GPJ is not yet complete, but I wanted to also just see whether or not here it is already in the mix of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murray.
Sorry, Chair, we actually couldn't hear the 2 questions. It's very, this audio is quite bad. I apologize. Would it be possible to ask the member just to repeat the 2 questions?
Will do, Minister. Honourable Murray, am I audible?
Yes, Chair,
Yeah.
am I audible?
It's just it's difficulty here in the chamber that don't think that the Minister heard your questions clearly. Could you just repeat those a little slower, and then certainly we can then move on. Thank you.
Okay, no problem, Chair. I just want to check you can hear me clearly.
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So my question with regards to the calculation of accounts receivable for the Western Cape Gambling and Racing Board wasn't answered. And the reason I asked the question is because ultimately I understand that the ratio can be quite subjective. So I wanted to just get a really clear understanding of how it was calculated. And as a result of that, I want to understand whether that ratio will be adjusted in future based on the amounts that the Gambling Board are currently receiving or have received through this adjustment, or noted in this adjustment. And then my second question, Chair, is I understand that the G4J strategy is currently being drafted, and I understand that it hasn't yet been completed, but I wanted to know if there were any elements of it that were included in this adjustment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Member Mvimbi.
Chairperson, can you hear me?
We can.
Chairperson?
We can hear you, Member Mvimbi.
No, thank you very much, Chairperson. Two more questions, Chairperson. Just one issue again that was raised in the MEC's budget speech is the amount that has been allocated again for the safety plan. We know that even I think 3 or 4 years ago, the project started then when the Premier announced this 1 billion safety plan. And I think again, if I look at on the figures, in the budget speech, he mentioned there'll be about just over 1 billion again that is meant for the safety plan, in particular for LEAP. Just want to check whether is it purely for officers, for the employment of more officers, or for operational basis, or are there any capital expenses that will be incurred on the safety plan that has been budgeted for? The second question, Chairperson, will be around the issue of, if I look again on the minister's budget speech, he mentioned that there'll be about 9.11 billion budgeted for mobility over the 3-year cycle of the medium-term budget. Now, of that, there is also an amount, but there's no specific amount for gaps. I would just want to check whether how much has been allocated for Golden Arrow. Can at the same time, on the same basis, maybe for this budget, start doing something for subsidization of the taxi industry? Is there no way there can be an allocation, something similar like the red dot or the blue dot that can be put aside for the taxi industry in particular? Even if it's from our reserve that we are having, I don't know whether is that possible, Minister and HOD. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Member Brankers.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, yes, I just want to confirm that 88 million adjusted appropriation budget, that is an emergency budget, that 88 million for energy security. And I just want to confirm, did I hear correctly the MEC state that the department won't be able to accommodate Muslims for this upcoming, if I recall correctly, the MEC mentioned that 1 or 2 weeks is too a short period. It is the period is too short to prepare and to assist Muslims for the upcoming Ramadan. I just want to confirm that is what the MEC has responded to my first question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Nkondlo.
Thank you. I just want to pose this one to the Minister, that I see in this budget speech, once again, no mention of the informal economy. And I think this discussion, we have been having it too many at times. So why is this? The second question, Chair, is I think around the infrastructure. On the infrastructure, I just want to understand when one consider, I think it's slide 34, on the nature of infrastructure investment, that the maintenance repairs budget is about 7.6 million, about 23.4%. This particular budget is against what percentage or scope of maintenance backlogs? I'm interested to know that, because one would recall, I think, in previous discussions or previous years with the Department of Transport and Public Works, before it was separated, that I think there was an issue about, backlogs in the maintenance. So I'm trying to understand that with this money, what level of maintenance backlogs will be sorted with this particular amount, and whether, if one looks at and pardon my little understanding, when one looks at the amounts in slide 32, slide 31, whether this, when you talk about infrastructure spend, I think there is the pie chart in 29, that what is mentioned here is 12.6% of goods and services budget. Does that include every infrastructure activities that will be taking place, even across other departments? I hope I'm making sense, because whilst the budget is 12.6 in the Department of Infrastructure, I'm trying to understand whether it accounts for all the infrastructure projects in the other departments. So I'm hoping that I'm making sense, so you can answer me on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and just Member America.
Thank you, Chair. Chairperson, the management of COEs, and I think it was stated that although the premise is that there's no one size fits all, in terms of the allocations, we are mindful of the service levels and pressure that exists within certain departments, or particularly education and health. Now, within the presentation, Chairperson, and it was also explained by Ms. Speak, that education, is standing out for special mention in terms of, as opposed to health, where specific sort of notification is that one way of managing COEs within the health is through natural attrition. And we know that as a result of the pandemic, certain service delivery expectations were placed on the back burner due to the particular circumstances that existed at the time. For example, elective surgery, and although significant progress had been made in terms of meeting some of those backlogs, there nonetheless remain pressure within the health sector in terms of certain services to be rendered. Does this sort of signal, although mindful of the fact that it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy, that there's a greater circumspection in terms of recruitment and hiring of personnel within the health department. And then secondly and lastly, Chair, and Mr. Savage has certainly assisted me in conceptualizing this sort of item clearer in terms of the 1 billion rand allocated for the energy resilience sort of strategy. And there's one of the questions I was going to ask is in terms of the energy reserve and that 101 million rand, it makes sense in terms of the response of Mr. Savage. My question is that the whole country finds itself within this particular space. So how are we going to navigate ourselves around the competition for the resources that will enable us to path whatever, determine a path for us to assist us in becoming more energy resilient. And then coupled with that is that we know that the city of Cape Town also has very ambitious and exciting plans that they have. Are we going to link up with the city of Cape Town and some of these funding earmarked to augment the plans that the city may have? Because ultimately we're one province, we're different municipalities and one metro. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm also just going to add my 2 cents quickly. I wanted to find out, I think I'm personally very passionate about disclosure of funds, and we saw in the COVID funding, previous Minister of Finance and current one in the Western Cape did a lot of effort in order to make sure that everyone in our province knows exactly where the COVID money went, that you're able to track every single little cent. And the announcement was also made today that we are going to disclose the energy funding. So I would like to understand, is it going to be similar to how we did the COVID? Is it going to be, how frequent is it going to be? Is it going to be monthly? Is it going to be yearly? What will that detail entail? Because I think with the previous national state of disaster with COVID, what made a lot of people very anxious was that all the corruption that was happening across South Africa. So when we look at disclosure of funding, I think a lot of people are very nervous when things like state of disasters are now declared, because the first question that goes through one's mind is, where's the money going? Who's the money going to be spent on? So how are we going to make sure that we are able to take people into our trust, almost into to be able to see how that particular money is being spent? And then finally, I just want to find out on page 110 of the overview of provincial revenue and expenditure, it indicates there that budget has been previously allocated to both the Western Cape Just Energy Transition Investment Plan as well as the solar PV, which is making up part of the energy response. And I just wanted to find out if you could just direct me as to where I find that. Do I go to my previous budget? Will I still see it in the current budget? Am I waiting for finances coming up? Do I go to a particular vote in this budget period? If someone could just assist me there. Thank you.
May I proceed, Chair? Okay. So on the first question from Honourable Murray, If I understand the question correctly, it was to account for the difference between what the projected revenue would be and then what it ended up being. And actually, there was more revenue than anticipated. That's, I think, basically because when the projections were put together, we were still in the COVID pandemic and we weren't sure how gambling would recover. And based on the previous year where there was a lot less gambling, that was the reason why the projections were a little out. And we're quite pleased that in the end, the revenue was more than what we had anticipated. I don't know if there's anything more the team would want to say on that. And then in the question on the growth for jobs, the Department of Economic Development, Tourism and the other growth for jobs departments don't receive allocations in the adjustment budget. However, in the main budget, there are substantial allocations for that priority. Just give me a second. We have 39.82 billion rand over the MTF allocated for the growth for jobs strategy, which is allocated to to the Department of Economic Development and Tourism. It's also allocated to local government, economic development and planning, agriculture department, and then of course some of the entities. And the details, of course, will be unpacked in the individual budget votes in more detail. And certainly as the growth for jobs plan is finalized at the beginning of the financial year. Then there were some questions from Honourable Mvimbi on the safety plan, if I could defer those, as well as a question on GABs. Then Honourable Brinkhuis, I can confirm the 88 million for backup generating power to municipalities is emergency funding in the current financial year. Then on the second question, that's not at all what I'm saying. It's important to note that Eskom is responsible for load shedding, and the principal agency responsible for the generation of electricity. So I think it would be important for a matter such and of such religious importance that the Honourable Member takes this up with Eskom urgently, because it is an important matter and it's not something we as the province can control. The load shedding is not up to us. And that's the reason why we want to become as independent from Eskom as quickly as possible, so that we would be able to buffer our citizens from the severe load shedding that is affecting everybody's lives. Then Honourable Nkondlo, in the informal economy, we'll unpack in more detail in the individual votes. But of course, the growth for job strategy is designed to help the economy in general, and that includes the informal economy. And what are those horizontal enablers that will help the informal economy? And in the last quarter, jobs within the informal economy grew by about 22%, if I remember correctly. And then there were some questions on the infrastructure maintenance and repairs, as well as goods and services, and how that relates to infrastructure funding, if I could defer those, as well as Honourable America's questions. And then Honourable Bartman, I'll answer your first one. The PDR will be published quarterly, and we will try to do it in as much detail as possible, similar to what was done for the COVID-19 expenditures. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Chair, I'll just add in on a few of the other questions, and I'll ask my colleagues to help me as well. Member Mvimbi, on your first question on the law enforcement advancement plan and program, while the bulk of the spending is on compensation of officers, there's obviously also equipment that's part of that, quite extensive equipment requirements, there are training requirements as well. So it's not just salaries that goes into that program. There's equipment, capital assets, the technology and training services and so forth that are all part of that program. It is a program where expenses are shared with the city of Cape Town, and so it's not the sole expenditure for that work. It is a partnership, and the vote, the Department of Police Oversight and Community Safety can provide more detail in that respect. That's vote 4. With Honourable Mbimbi, with respect to mobility, you're quite right that the 9 billion includes the payment to Golden Arrow for bus services through the Public Transport Operating Grant Program. And that's now in the new Vote 8 Department of Mobility. There are other aspects to our mobility expenditures, and obviously this is an area for a lot of further development going forward. So there is traffic regulation. That's an important additional aspect of what goes on there in that department, and they'll be able to give you both an insight into their strategy and future directions in the discussion on that vote. You asked the question, why not direct subsidies to the taxi industry? I mean, there are both. I mean, that's an extended discussion in its own right, but from a fiscal perspective, it's actually quite a simple answer. Is simply we do not have the funding for it. For a small-scale pilot that was attempted in that respect, that would be very difficult for us to sustain indefinitely, and to expand that beyond a pilot would be well beyond the capacity of the provincial government. It would be, I think, in the order of sort of 2 billion rand or more for just that activity alone, on the basis of the design of the pilot. So it wasn't scalable for us. I know that the department is, as a priority, continuing to look for sources of finance, and they'd be able to report on their successes in that regard. There is also other work being done, which is on the broader framework for public support to public transport. So fiscal support to public transport as a whole. In other words, the big policy question to ask there is, do you fund that from the supply side? Do you fund the operators, or do you fund the commuters, the users of public transport? So that's whether you put the subsidy in on the supply side or on the demand side. And they have slightly different effects, and I know that some work is also ongoing in the department in that respect as well. Honourable Brinkhuis, just to clarify that in terms of the emergency assistance to municipalities, that is predominantly to protect water and sanitation services, not to provide general energy, additional energy to municipal grids. It's really why we reacted so quickly was when we realized that our water sources were under threat, and that potable drinking water may be threatened, and that sanitation networks may break down, or sewage networks may start to become overwhelmed. Then we acted immediately, because that's got a massive and immediate public health problem that would have widespread effects, not just fiscal and economic effects. And so that expenditure is aimed at just making sure that we protect those core infrastructure networks, those core pumping aspects of those infrastructure networks, and nothing more at this point. Obviously, these will mostly be diesel generators, given that this is the immediate option available to respond. We'd all like them to be renewable energy and so on and so forth. It's also that's expensive, and municipalities are going to have to bear the cost of the diesel to run. So we'll need to approach this with some circumspection. It's really just those critical expenditures that we're meeting through the 88 million rand at this point. And I do understand fully your concerns coming up to Ramadan. The member Kondlo on the maintenance, the size of the maintenance backlogs. I'm no engineer here, but my experience, and I'm not going to talk badly of my engineering colleagues, is that they can come up with some quite big numbers when it comes to maintenance backlogs on infrastructure. In other words, they sort of can become slightly unquantifiable. What we know is that we are not quite keeping up with the scale of backlogs in maintenance, because of course every year there's a new set of backlogs that comes along. You don't just maintain a road, for example, and then that gives you a free pass for the next 10, 15 years. You've got to come back. There'll be other roads and so forth. The same would apply to our public facilities, our schools and clinics and so forth. We are trying something of a different approach with those facilities this year, where there is planned or scheduled maintenance, which can often be the sort of deep maintenance that one doesn't necessarily see in a facility, but doesn't necessarily alter, by doing it, doesn't necessarily always immediately alter the user experience of that facility. And so we are also making money available, you'll see it in the respective votes, on what some of those user experience related improvements can be made in our clinics, in our schools, and so forth. So, for example, in terms of, in a certain case, it may be appropriate, there are queues at a clinic to make sure that that queuing environment is one that is as pleasant and enabled as possible for the clinic users, and making sure we're making those kind of investments alongside the deep maintenance investments that needs to go. But my short answer there is that I don't have a number for you here on the size of the backlog. One of the reasons the new Department of Infrastructure is being created is that we take a much more strategic approach to long-term infrastructure investment needs across the province. And so I think some of the modelling that they would do towards the Western Cape Infrastructure Framework would be able to reveal those numbers. And I understand that work is underway, but it's a very good question to ask to Vote 10 in their engagement, or where are they in building the evidence base for strategy making for the Western Cape Infrastructure Framework. And then just on the other subset of your question, Honourable Nkondlo, is the Department of Infrastructure is not where all infrastructure spending happens. So the funding for education infrastructure is on the education vote. And you'll see it clearly there. In the funding for health, likewise. It does not mean that the Department of Health or the Department of Education cannot say to the Department of Infrastructure, please would you do something on our behalf? And they would then turn them into an implementing agent, which they do use them in this capacity, and then they pay them as an implementing agent. In the case of some of the smaller departments, though, what the money that you're seeing on the Department of Infrastructure does include, it's not sitting on the vote of those departments, it's sitting on the vote of the Department of Infrastructure. So in very simple terms, what you see, the infrastructure money you see on the Department of Infrastructure vote is roads, and it is other public works infrastructure excluding health and education. And hopefully that is made quite clear in the documentation as well when you dig into each of the votes, because we do try and bring that out, and it does reflect other kind of technology or institutional changes that are happening in the infrastructure environment as well. Member America, yes, I think we are circumspect with respect to headcount growth. We've always been that in the province, but we're not. I would like to think we're not foolhardy in constraining headcount growth, particularly in our frontline services. The challenge in the Department of Health is that there is a deep restriction that's going on in the national funding that's available. It's happening both in the conditional grants and in the calculation of that component of the provincial equitable share. So those are both being constrained. They both have compensation effects. And the department simultaneously is coming out of the COVID environment where it's having to revert to normal services. So what this budget does is it tries to smooth that downward transition for them. In other words, say, we understand it's very difficult to re-engineer your service platforms.
Colleagues, I'm just going to ask that if you're online, just to keep yourself on mute. Otherwise, there's going to be feedback in the chamber. I know it's a long evening in budget. I know it can be considered to be boring to some, and we are on a mission to make finance fun again, but we are almost there. Thank you.
So there is some smoothing and protection that is offered to the department in that transition. But we can't prevent the transition as the province, because we are dependent on these bigger national flows. So that smoothing is happening. We try and explain that on page 98 of the overview document, exactly what's happening. But we are at the same time recognizing there are backlog pressures to be caught up with in terms of surgical backlogs and so forth. And so there is funding that's put in there as well. So there's funding to support smoothing of the resizing and to help to address surgery backlogs and so forth. And I was very pleased to see the progress that the department announced, I think yesterday or the day before, in reducing some of the backlogs they have in those services. Are we worried about competition for resources in the energy sector? No, we love to win competitions in the Western Cape, and I think we can with a credible plan that we will attract the skills, the talents, the resources towards us. I think the approach that we're taking is let's partner where we can, and we're certainly partnering with municipalities who are trying to move fast. One of those is the City of Cape Town, and we're saying, well, where can we be an effective partner to the city in our overall program here, and we'll do that with other municipalities as well. We're wanting to win the competition, I think, not for its own sake, but we think that, there's a big transition that's underway, and there are a lot of lessons to be learnt that will have countrywide impact. So if we can help to show the way for a particular municipality to become less dependent on the Eskom supply, well, that could have great national impact, and that's what we all want as South Africans, is to protect ourselves from some of the damage that comes with load shedding. Honourable Bartman, yes, I think the Minister indicated we're very committed to our tracking of expenditures. Just to point out that if the disaster in the energy space is a much more slow moving, it's a very different disaster to the COVID disaster. And so obviously we still have to learn a little bit around what expenditures we're actually tracking, and we're just getting some of that first information through, and we'll respond to that. My sense is it doesn't make sense to try and track it on a monthly basis, because it's the dynamics of the expenditure are going to be very different. So probably makes sense to do it on a quarterly basis. If we look at that and we say, no, we're wrong there, we do need to do it on a monthly basis, we'll do it on a monthly basis. So it's not running away from the transparency, it's trying to get the right fit for proper disclosure, useful information to the public on every cent of their money. And then I will leave it maybe to Spandareda on the last question on page 110 on the previously allocated budget items. Budget previously allocated.
So essentially with regards to the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan as well as the solar PV, those are actually allocations that have been previously made by the departments itself. So you'll be able to find it within the budgets of that respective departments, and they've allocated for that across the MTF.
So which departments are those? I just want to know, which vote do I go look for in the homework that you gave me?
Solar PV would be in WCD, and the Just Energy Transition is in the Department of Economic Development and Tourism.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, are there any urgent follow-up questions now? I would like to wrap it up. I know there are lots of people that need to go read bedtime stories to their kids. If not, I just want to say thank you to Minister, HOD and departmental officials, as well as the Department of Premier Online. I don't think people always realize how much work goes into putting a budget together. And maybe those of us who do sit on Tuesday evenings until 7 o'clock in the evenings at Parliament going through budgetary documents and who are considered a bit more nerdy than others, it's amazing to see what services are being done in the provinces when you look at these figures. When you think about how does one protect quality of water, when one thinks about how do you protect a patient while surgery is ongoing, when you think about how is someone going to pass the IT exam when there's no electricity at all, when you think about how a woman is walking down the street and there might not be a street light to be able to assist with lighting in order to get home, when your GPS isn't working on your phone, when your signal isn't working on your phone, and you think about what is the communication strategy going to be when you can't even phone your loved ones in an emergency. These things are so important, and it affects people's lives directly. I was very emotional when I found out that the Langsburg clinic got a generator, and I'm a bit tempted to go call her a new name, like maybe call her Dola, so that, you know, niemand mors met die loskop Dola nie. But from my constituency specifically, I know that the little things are really appreciated. Places like the city of Cape Town, sometimes people think that the city of Cape Town is the Western Cape, but when you really go into the bigger rural areas into the Western Cape, being able to protect potable water is a big deal in many, many towns, and it's a basic human right. To the members online and in the house, I want to say thank you for being here with us so late in the evening, for engaging robustly in the budget, and I know that it will continue in the days going forward. I would like to remind chairs and respective committees. Just a reminder that the budget votes in the respective committees are also public hearings. All the votes will continue from tomorrow the 15th up until the 20th of March. The budget committee will consider the reports of committees and the respective votes of those meetings on the 27th of March at 8 o'clock, where the budget committee will then consider the full bill. So I do encourage members for detail in the respective vote to go to those respective committees and engage on the respective votes. But with that, and I'm informed that the health slot will be on Thursday, the 23rd of March, but I just want to check, Ms. Kluter, that will be reflected on a program. Okay, so through programming, the health slot will be on the 23rd of March, which is the Thursday. Thank you so much, colleagues. With that, the budget is tabled here in this committee and referred to the respective committees. Thanks. Hope you have a lovely evening. The meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chairperson.